Would you pray with me a moment? Open my lips that my mouth might show forth your praise. And may the words of my mouth and the meditations of our hearts be acceptable in thy sight, O Lord, our strength and our Redeemer. Amen. This story that we just heard and saw of Jesus healing a man who's born blind is almost comic in the ways that the people in the story seem to go out of their way to ignore the obvious. It's like they're there kicking dust over home plate so the umpire can't see the strike zone, so that others can't see what they saw. In the ways that, as Jerry was reading it, one after the other argues identity, mistaken identity, correctness, incorrectness, legality, illegality, believable, unbelievable, cause, effect, fact, or fake, rather than just seeing what's there right before their eyes. A man who had never seen had his eyes unlocked, which is what the Greek word means. Able to see for the first time. As I said, it's almost comic because it's actually more tragic of how everyone thinks and behaves and is unwilling to see. And it's further tragic because it's how so many of us go through our lives. It was a long story, so I want to remind you of parts of it. Following this miracle, there's this first group of people who go, is it really the beggar? You notice in the story, the man never has a name. He's always identified by what's wrong with him. The beggar, the blind man, the sinner. And they argue back and forth right in front of the guy, although the guy says, hey, I am the man. It's me. And then rather accepting that, they say, well, how are your eyes open? And he tells the story about how Jesus did it. But you might remember that rather than accept the story, they go, well, where is he? They redirect. Then the story points out that this thing happened on the Sabbath. And since all of you are not Jewish, you wouldn't realize that, but you're not supposed to do these things on the Sabbath. And the religious folks, the Pharisees, weighed in. How did this happen? And the man explains again, and they come right out. It can't be from God because the man broke the Sabbath law when he made a ball of mud. And then, so we've got two reasons why we're not going to pay attention. Then this story takes a strange turn. Because it's no longer from the contemporary perspective. You might have noticed that all of a sudden Jerry is mentioning the Jews. The Jews come on. And of course, everyone in the story is Jewish. There is no one in Jerusalem at this time except for the Romans who aren't Jewish. So we know that the writer of John is fast forwarding to his own time, when he himself and the people with him had been thrown out of their local synagogue because they kept insisting that Jesus was the Messiah. Whereas the other folks in the synagogue were like, no, he's not the Messiah. The Messiah hasn't come yet. So these Jews turn to some other Jews, the man's parents, and say, how did this happen? And they too redirect, saying, ask him, he's of age. Because they're afraid of the consequences of what will happen if they say, of breaking with religious tradition. So these people go back to the man, tell us how it happened. And they said, it's not possible. This man has to be a sinner. And you never know. Is it because everyone's a sinner? Is it because he broke the Sabbath law? Or because they don't like him? And the man himself gets right to the most important thing. I don't know about all of that. I do know this, though. I was born blind, and now I see. And they go back and they go forth and they argue about righteousness and how God works and how sin works. And they end up categorizing the cured man as a sinner for not agreeing with them. And they throw him out, which once again, you need to know, wouldn't have been at that time. It would have been in John's time, so about 100 years later. And also our time. This is so contemporary. People throwing each other out of the church or the synagogue or the mosque or town meeting or the neighborhood. Refusing to embrace God's love. Then the man is found again by Jesus, and he realizes he's face to face with the Son of Man. God's Messiah has done this thing for him, and he rejoices in worship. And there's this final back and forth between Jesus and the religious folks again about who's a sinner, who can really see. And of course, the lesson is meant to challenge us. Are we seeing only what we want to see, or are we seeing how God sees? As I was reading it this week, I had to laugh because the whole thing reminds me of a boy. When I was a boy, I would go to the dentist's office. And in the dentist waiting room, there would be kids' magazines. And in the kids' magazines, in the middle would always be this page called, "What's Wrong with This Picture?" And so I would sit in the dentist's office looking at the picture, spending time, whatever time I had, trying to take my mind off the cavity I may have to find everything in the picture that was wrong, unusual, unexpected, like the lady with the beehive in her hair, not how it's supposed to be, like the guy riding beach balls, zany, impossible. And no matter how many things wrong with the picture I found, there always seemed to be more. One more mistake, one more fault, one more incorrectness, one more impossibility, which is just like our lesson this morning. Jesus unlocks this man's eyes, and everyone has a reason why they can't believe it. Everyone's focused on what's wrong with this picture rather than what's right. Why Jesus shouldn't have done that. Why that didn't fit into proper religion. Why it didn't fit into their ideas about God, their ideas about sin and righteousness. And they all refused to accept and to celebrate this amazing gift. But of course the point's not them, because then we'd be just like the people in the story, right? What's wrong with them? The question is, what's wrong with us? It's not them, it's us. We're all grown-up people here now. The children have left. And we know that in life brings us things that we think shouldn't be. We get cancers. There are tragic accidents. People abandon us and betray us. Divorce happens. Abuse happens. We lose our loved ones. We lose our identity. Our job goes away. Our career goes away. We make a bad investment. Our money goes away. Our possessions go away. Some people get stuck in these losses and might spend their entire lives living from that center of what's wrong. You know. Oh yeah, he's the guy who lost his leg in the war. Oh yeah, she's the woman who went out of business. Oh yeah, that's the guy who was abused when he was a kid. Yeah, that's the woman whose husband left her. Yeah, that's the guy with cancer. Oh, she's an alcoholic. Maybe that's us. Maybe we're stuck, wondering what's wrong with the picture. My friends, One of the great gifts of faith is being able to move beyond spending all our time to figuring out what's wrong or why this shouldn't be or who's to blame, to opening ourselves to being cured, to moving from the place in our life where things shouldn't be this way to wondering how there is a right that might come out of it. Believing that somehow something can grow out of this, and then waking up every morning in faith to allowing just that to happen. I don't need to tell you, the world is full of inspiring stories of people who did just that. People who overcame the circumstances of their lives and used the circumstances of their lives to become healers. People who lost abilities and transformed it into new abilities. We need to change how we see. From seeing all the things that shouldn't happen, like what's wrong with this picture, to noticing what's missing as opposed to seeing what's there. And to seeing the openings as places where God is trying to break in and doing a new thing. It's so counterintuitive, Christianity. Life is not about going from strength to strength, but growing out of our weakness into God's gift of strength. So this week, this day, the next 30 minutes, rather than trying to see what's wrong with the picture, see if you can open yourselves to what great blessing might be about to break forth from the very thing that hurts right now. And rather than getting stuck, welcome God's grace. And you know what? This is the most important part. Be a conduit. Let others know, because they may need to get unstuck too. May it be so for all of you. Amen.